In my last talk, I talked about how we can have a personal story or a personal drama that we are seeking to outplay in our lives. And I deliberately made this the talk that comes before this one, and this talk is about your life plan. And the reason for first talking about the dramas is that the drama can have a very deep impact on our lives and also on how we see our life plan. Now, I first learned about the concept that we have a life plan or a divine plan. And I learned about this before I knew anything about the personal story and the personal dramas. So when I look back, I can see that for many years, my personal drama was influencing how I looked at my divine plan or my life plan. I really thought that the purpose of my life plan was to fulfill the goal that defined my personal drama. In my case, remove war from the earth. I thought this was my divine plan, to work on removing war by removing the outer causes of war, getting other people to change. And this caused, as I said, a lot of frustration. So it's more constructive to realize that we have a drama before you start contemplating your life plan, because you can at least start on separating the two. So let's look at this idea of a life plan. It's something we become open to when we become open to reincarnation. The whole idea of a life plan is that before you came into this particular lifetime, you of course still existed as a self-aware conscious being. And you were, before you came into this lifetime, in a different realm, a higher realm than the physical world. Your soul, your being, what I've called your emotional, mental, and identity bodies, and your conscious self was in this higher realm. For most spiritual people, at least, it was a higher realm. This isn't the case for all people on earth. But nevertheless, most of us who are spiritual people, we were in this higher realm. In this higher realm, we were together with the Ascended Masters, who are our personal spiritual teachers. And we were in many ways preparing ourselves for this embodiment. And in cooperation with our spiritual teachers, we were creating this plan for this lifetime. And for me, this was very revolutionary. This entire concept of a life plan was revolutionary. And it was revolutionary because, well, for several reasons. But the first one is purpose. All of my life, even when I was a young child, I always had a sense that my life has a purpose. I am here for a specific reason, for a specific purpose. I have a purpose for this lifetime. Now, as I was growing up, my parents were not particularly religious, but of course I was exposed to Christianity, and then there was scientific materialism. And in both of these outer belief systems, I couldn't see any purpose. I couldn't connect my sense of having a purpose to the religion of Christianity or to scientific materialism. So, as I was growing up, I felt this vacuum, this emptiness, I know I have a purpose, but where is it? What is there in my outer situation that stimulates this sense of purpose and gives me a specific direction? This is what I'm here to do. And quite frankly, when I look back, I can see that even when I was a very young child, my big desire was to be a writer. I always wanted to write. I wanted to write books. And I was fascinated by books. I learned to read even before I started school, and the whole idea of books was just incredibly fascinating to me. But of course, I was brought up to think that, I grew up in Denmark. There's only 5 million people speaking the Danish language. So I was brought up to think that you can't make a living as a writer in Denmark because there's too few people who can read your books. And so my life's purpose, I was putting it aside, I was suppressing it because I didn't know what to do with it. There was nothing in my outer situation that stimulated it. So when I found the spiritual path and learned about a divine plan, I suddenly realized, but this is what I decided before I came into embodiment that I wanted to do. So it must be possible. See, Many times as children, we have this intuitive sense of what's in our divine plan. We don't have the concept of the divine plan, but we have this intuitive sense, oh, I'd really like to do this. And it's because it is in our divine plan to do this. But why did we put it in our divine plan? Well, what often happens to us is that as we grow a little older, well-meaning people, parents, siblings, teachers in school, oh, it's impossible, you can't become an astronaut, or you can't be a writer, or you can't do this, right? So they want us to become realistic according to their evaluation. But you see, when we make our life plan, we are not looking from a human perspective. We are looking from a higher perspective. And we are not looking at it in an unrealistic, idealistic way. We are looking at what is possible. What is possible for us to achieve. However, and this was very profound for me to understand this, all of these well-meaning people who said to me, oh, you can't become a writer and make a living as a writer in Denmark. In a sense, they were right. If I had been writing in Danish for the past 20 years, I wouldn't have had a chance of making a living off of it. But my divine plan was also right, because my divine plan said, you can become a writer if you transcend certain things in yourself and in your upbringing. And one of the things I had to transcend was the Danish language. I had to learn English. I had to become as proficient in English as I was in Danish. And for the last 20 years, I've been writing in English. I'm making a living off of writing in English. So my divine plan was realistic, but I had to transcend first the language barrier, but I also had to transcend a lot of other things. Because in order to become a writer and write about the things I'm writing about, spiritual topics, I of course had to walk the spiritual path. And I had to reach a certain level of the spiritual path where I wasn't a beginner, I wasn't a novice, I had enough experience, I had enough grasp of what the spiritual path is all about, that I could actually be helpful to other people. And that required a period of time, a period of, let's say, almost 30 years. Almost 30 years, where I was extremely focused on my personal growth, my resolving my psychology, overcoming all kinds of things in myself, all of these subconscious selves that I've talked about. And if I hadn't been willing to do this, I couldn't have become a writer. Right? So obviously this is not about me, but it's about saying, you, before you came into this lifetime, you were working with the Ascended Masters that are close to you. You were looking at what is it realistic for you to accomplish, not from a human perspective, but from a higher perspective. What is your highest potential? And this means that you defined a goal, an outer goal, for what you want to accomplish in this lifetime, what kind of a person you want to be, what kind of a job or career or interests you want to have, what ideas you might potentially bring forth that could help improve some aspect of life on Earth. So this is your goal, this is your kind of high potential. But then you also defined a path leading you to that, and that path requires you to transcend yourself, to really work on yourself. And this here is a very important realization. This is not about just finding an outer path and a particular spiritual teaching and a particular guru and a particular spiritual practice and then practicing that. When I learned about the concept of a divine plan, it was in my second spiritual movement that had teachings from the Ascended Masters, and many people saw themselves as very advanced spiritual students, and they thought that in order to discover their divine plan, they just had to keep doing enough decrees to transmute the negative energies, and then one day, poof, they would discover their divine plan. But there were also people who realized, as I did, that this is just one aspect of it. The other aspect is the psychology. You have to look at yourself. What are the hang-ups in my psychology that are preventing me from fulfilling my divine plan? Because those hang-ups are actually part of your divine plan. when you make your divine plan, it's just not just about the outer things you want to accomplish. It's also about the inner things you want to accomplish in terms of overcoming these psychological hang-ups that you have probably had for several lifetimes, perhaps many lifetimes. And now you have decided, now I'm at the point, I have worked on this in previous lifetimes, and now I'm at the point where I can really break through, overcome these particular one or several, most likely several, for me many, hang-ups in my psychology. This is the lifetime of I can overcome this. And for me, when I look back, I can see that, oh, this was actually much more important part of my divine plan than becoming a writer and doing all these outer things. The inner work was the most important aspect of my life plan. And you know, I look back and I realized that I started seeing this clearly in the early 1990s, and I made a complete shift in my outer path where I stopped focusing on doing the outer things, you know, degrees and studying spiritual teachings, and I instead focused on my psychology. I went to therapy, I used various kinds of therapies, and ever since then it's been a constant work on my psychology, and I'm working on it today as well. So this was, if I hadn't made that shift, I would never have become a writer. It simply couldn't have happened because my own psychology was blocking it. And I can look today back and see there was this block, there was that block, there was the next block, and I can see how block after block after block, it was like being in a dense forest and I'm cutting down one tree after another. And after I cut down enough trees, I could start getting glimpses of my life plan. And as I kept cutting down trees, I got a more and more clear vision of it. And this is what can happen to all of us. All of us who are spiritual people, all of us who are open to the spiritual path, we have a life plan. When we made it, it was a realistic plan if we are willing to transcend ourselves and overcome the psychological blocks that are blocking our divine plan. They are blocking it by preventing us from seeing it, seeing what we have to do to manifest it. I can look back, you know, I started actually writing spiritual books in the early 1990s. But the books, I wrote a couple of books that I never published because I realized later they were not at the level where they needed to be because I wasn't at the level where I needed to be. But 10 years later, I had overcome some limitations and now I could start doing my work. But my work has still gone through several phases, several levels where I have become more and more clear in what I could see that my work really is. And the same thing, of course, can happen for you. There is a preparatory phase where you have to overcome some psychological blocks. Then you start having a vision. What is it that's my main task in this lifetime? You have glimpses of it. And then you need to start working on it. Even though you may not be ready, you still may have some psychological blocks, but you have to start walking. Because you have to start experimenting. Because as you experiment, you are seeing some other blocks. By writing these first couple of books I'm talking about, I saw some blocks in my psychology. And then I could start working on those and then gradually overcome them. And that's how it is. You know, first there's a preparatory phase, then we start having a vision, and then we start seeing the limitations that prevent us from fulfilling the vision. And if we're willing to work on them, and if we really focus on working on them, we get a more and more clear vision. Oh, I thought I could be a writer by writing these kind of books, but now I see I can become a writer by writing another kind of books that I couldn't even imagine before. And of course, the same with whatever your field is. So, this is one aspect of having a divine plan. Purpose. It gives you a sense of purpose. From when I first heard about the concept of the divine plan, which was in the mid-1980s, I've had a much clearer sense of purpose than I had before. I always had a sense of purpose, and I think most spiritual people do. But certainly, from the moment I heard about the concept of the divine plan, I had a stronger sense of purpose, and it has been driving me on the spiritual path. That's why I've been willing to put in the effort to resolve my psychology and do all of the other work with degrees and studying teachings and this and that. So, so this is one aspect of it. And the purpose, of course, leads to another consideration, but I'll return to that later. The The other big advantage for me of discovering that I have a life plan is that it helps me explain a lot of the things that have happened in my life. And by explaining them and understanding how they fit into my divine plan, I can make peace with them. I met many people in life, and I actually, in one of my early videos, I talked about my father, who at the age of 10 decided he didn't want to learn, he didn't want to be in school, and thereby sabotaged his life dream of becoming an engineer. So this is a typical example of people. Something happened in their lives that they think shouldn't have happened. But they are holding on to it. They are letting it define their lives on an ongoing basis. So they can't move on. They can't get over it. They can't let it go. And I know that when I look at my personal life, I think I had a fairly easy life compared, especially had an easy childhood compared to what many spiritual people have had. So I know there are some people, and I met some people who say, oh, well, Kim, you had it easy. You should have seen the childhood I had. Then you wouldn't have been able to let go of it either. And I'm not so sure they're right. Because I also had a difficult childhood because my psychology was what it was. And what makes a childhood difficult? Is it the outer things that happens to us, or is it the way we react to it? And that's what I have been saying in some of the other videos. I know it sounds harsh to some people, but the difference between spiritual people who make it on the path and people who either don't find the path or don't make it on the path is, are you willing to look at this one simple mechanism? What affects you is not the outer situation, but your psychological reaction to it. Because this is empowering. If you think it's the outer situation that affects you, it's disempowering. Because when you realize it was my psychological reaction that affected me, then you can say, what is it in my psychology that caused me to react that way? And then you can look at that and you can find out, as I've said, it was a subconscious self, a separate self that caused you to react the way you did. And as I explained in the previous video, it's not a matter of undoing some physical situation, because you can't undo what happened to you in your childhood. It's a matter of letting the self die. And when you let a specific self die, you free yourself from the reaction, especially if you use decrees and invocations to transform the energy that was misqualified. You can free yourself from anything in your childhood. And I can guarantee you that part of your divine plan was to free yourself from the psychological mechanism that was triggered by whatever happened in your childhood. It was simply part of your divine plan. You most likely deliberately placed yourself in that particular family situation, childhood situation, in order to force yourself to look at this psychological mechanism. Sounds harsh, but it's just a realistic assessment you made when you were in a higher realm. What do I need to overcome? Did I overcome it in my last lifetime? No. I ignored it. I pushed it aside. I denied it. This time I don't want to deny it because I have to get beyond this in order to fulfill my higher goal. So I'm going to put myself in a situation where I can't deny it. I can't ignore it. And this is most likely what you did. And the same for all of us. You know, we deliberately put ourselves in certain situations. I've said in one of my other videos that in 1987 I moved to the United States because of my second spiritual movement. And the first, especially the first 7-8 years that I was in the United States were very, very difficult physically from an outer perspective. I went through a lot of difficulties. I think I can easily say that none of my family members would have survived psychologically, and the vast majority of people I met wouldn't have survived psychologically. But now I look back at this and I have made complete peace with it because I see one very simple thing. All of this had one purpose, and it's what the Buddhists call ego pummeling. My ego simply needed to be beaten down, shattered, challenged, stirred up, so I could see it and deal with it. And I did. And so when you let go of the selves that are making up the ego, you're at peace with the situation. You can look back and you can say, yeah, ideally this shouldn't have happened to me, but it did happen. And now that I see that it actually helped my growth, it really helped my growth, why should I resent it? Why should I regret it? Why should I say, oh, you shouldn't have done that, you fool? Why? Whatever I did, it was just part of my divine plan of pummeling the ego so I could get over myself, over my blocks, and get started on my real work, the real work that I'm here to do. And I think you will find that if you look at your life, you can see the same thing. You can see the same mechanism. Certainly, if you come to see these selves and let them go, you will come to that point where you can look at your life as it has formed itself up to this point, and you can say, I know there were some rough patches, but I'm at peace with it now. I see how it all fits into my divine plan, how it was all meant to help me see something in my psychology that I needed to overcome so I can focus on the positive aspects of my life plan, the creative aspects of my life plan, the contribution I'm here to make. So why regret? Why look back? Why waste time and energy on this? Let me look forward. Let me look at what can I do for the rest of my life? What am I really here to accomplish? And I think if you go through this process I've described of working on these selves, you will come to that point. And it'll be a tremendous shift, as it certainly was for me. Now there's another aspect of your divine plan. And it was something that an enormous amount of spiritual teachings out there don't talk about it. They don't incorporate it. As far as I can tell, it's pretty unique to the teachings of the Ascended Masters that they have been giving since the 1930s. And it's the concept of the Ascension. So when I found my first spiritual movement, it was an Indian guru that had come to the West promoting this meditation technique. And most people who were exposed to that movement can probably guess who it is, but it doesn't really matter. But they had some teachings that were based on going back to the Vedas. And the Vedas are, of course, talking about reincarnation. But the way I understood it, perhaps I didn't get the full understanding back then, but I did take some courses in these Vedic teachings. And the way I understood it was that there is this ultimate God, Brahman, and everything came out of Brahman. And I, as an individual being, sometime in the past, I came out of Brahman. And I've taken incarnation after incarnation after incarnation, and I'll continue to do this for a long, long cycle. And then when the cycle is over, I, as an individual, I just disappear back into Brahman. That didn't motivate me at all. In fact, when I heard this, I intuitively sensed there's something wrong here. There's something missing. This can't be all. This cannot be the purpose of life. And it wasn't until I found the Ascended Master teachings that I saw an alternative. Because the Ascended Master teachings are, of course, based on the concept that the goal of incarnating on Earth is not to just have all of these experiences and then disappear into nothingness, whereby we could say, well, nothing I experienced ever mattered. It didn't make any difference. No, the goal is actually to continue to incarnate until we qualify for the final exam of Schoolroom Earth, which is a process called the Ascension, whereby we can permanently ascend from Earth, meaning we don't have to come back into embodiment. And that means that we now become Ascended Masters. And when I first heard about the concept of Ascended Masters, I was still affected by this Vedic idea that we just keep going in a cycle. And the way I first understood Ascended Masters was, oh, they're perfect beings, which means they don't grow. And I intuitively rebelled against it. I said, it can't be right. But then I realized fairly quickly that Ascended Masters can actually still grow because there are higher levels of the spiritual realm. There are various levels. And I explained this in my How the World Works videos, that we are in the 7th sphere. So there are 6 spheres that came before us that have all ascended. and there are ascended masters in each of these spheres, and we can keep expanding our sense of consciousness until we reach the creator level consciousness, which is what in the Vedas is called Brahman. So we can actually continue. It's not an endless cycle where we disappear. We can continue raising our sense of self until we reach the creator consciousness. This was an idea that, to me, instantly vibrated with my intuition. This resonated. This I could agree with intuitively. I felt, here is the teaching I've been looking for. I have the potential to ascend, which doesn't mean I disappear. It means I actually become who I really am. I attain a higher state of consciousness, a higher sense of self, and I can continue growing from there in the ascended realm. But the important thing for me was I don't have to come back to Earth and reincarnate another several lifetimes. So for me it was quite clear when I heard this teaching that the goal of my life plan is to ascend after this lifetime. But this may not be the case for you. And especially in this particular time we're in, because most people are probably, as I've explained in some other videos, open to the idea of cosmic cycles. There was a little over 2,000 year period that was called the Age of Pisces, which was the last 2,000 years, and we are now moving into the next cycle called the Age of Aquarius, which is another 2,000 year cycle. And every time we shift from one cycle to another, there are a lot of challenges. People have to shift their consciousness, raise their consciousness. Some people get stuck in the old, and some people have to be forerunners for bringing in the ideas of the new cycle. So right now we are in this transition period, and the Ascended Master who is assigned to oversee the next 2,000 year period is called Saint Germain. And he has some plans for manifesting a golden age in the next 2,000 year cycle. And there are many people, and I have met many of these spiritual people, who have it as part of the divine plan and who are aware of it, that they want to help Saint Germain bring in the golden age of Aquarius. And this means that it's not necessarily in their life plan to ascend after this lifetime. They might want to come back and help bring forth even more ideas. So if this is the case, it's not for you the most important to focus on qualifying for your ascension. For me, the focus for the last, 35, 40 years has been ascending. How do I qualify for my ascension? And it gives you some special considerations because you basically have to overcome all of your attachment to anything on earth, all of your identification with anything on earth. You have to be willing to let it all go. But if you are meant to be an embodiment for one or several more embodiments, it's not necessarily a matter of that. You don't need to let go of all attachments to earth, but you do need to let go of the psychological hang-ups, the separate selves, that prevent you from helping Saint Germain bring in the next stage. And that means because in order to help with that, you have to be open to the ideas. As like Saint Germain has said that he's in the spiritual realm, but he is constantly releasing ideas. And they first go into the identity realm, then they go into the mental, then they go into the emotional. But really, he can only release them from the ascended realm, from the spiritual realm, into the identity realm. In order to be brought further down, some people have to tune into these ideas, take them into their minds, and bring them down to the next level. So some people need to tune in to Saint Germain's ideas at the identity level, which are very abstract, very spherical at that level. So a lot of people can't tune into it, but there are some that can. So some people can tune into it at the identity level, and they can then bring them down to the mental level where they become more specific, more concrete. And that means there are now a lot of people that are focused at the mental level. They can grasp these ideas. They can grasp the overall ideas from the identity realm. And they can make them more specific, whereby they can bring them into the emotional realm. And in the emotional realm, it's not so much a matter of grasping an idea, it's more a matter of accepting that it's possible, that it's realistic. Because this is what gives the drive that brings it into the physical. So let's just take one idea that I talk about in my How the World Works videos, that energy, a higher form of energy. Saint Germain has said that there are already higher forms of energy that he's ready to release to humankind. But in order to be grasped, there are some people who have to grasp it at the identity level, at a very high level. And that requires you to go beyond scientific materialism, which says that there's nothing beyond the material universe. Because these energy sources are not material sources. They are coming from the spiritual realm. So there has to be people who can grasp this. Bring them down to the mental, where people can begin to see, well, how could we actually use this energy? How could we convert it into electricity and make it useful? But then there are also people at the emotional level who have to be able to accept, yes, it is possible to have a higher form of energy than what we have known so far. Today you see how many people that are ridiculing the idea of what they call free energy, because they are citing the second law of thermodynamics, and you can never get more out of an interaction than the energy you put into it. But see, this is not a matter of getting something out of it at the physical level. It's a matter of bringing energy down from the spiritual realm. And how did the entire universe come to exist in the first place? By energy from the spiritual realm being lowered to the identity level, then lowered to the mental, then lowered to the emotional, then lowered to the physical. There is a constant stream of energy from the spiritual into the physical. Otherwise, the physical world wouldn't be here and it couldn't continue to exist. So it's just a matter of finding out how to harness that energy and coming to accept that this is possible. So you see, there are these different levels, and then of course there are some people also who need to bring it into the physical levels. Here is a device we can make. Here is an idea that will improve some aspect of life. So many people have it as part of their life plan to be part of this process of manifesting Saint Germain's golden age by tuning into his ideas at some level, bringing them out into any level. It doesn't have to be energy, of course. Any area of society needs to be improved. Any area of society. Okay? It doesn't matter what your occupation is, what your interest is. You can find a way to improve that area by tuning into the ideas that Saint Germain is releasing. So this could very well be a big part of your divine plan. But it could also be that your life plan is to ascend after this lifetime. And so this is something you will gain clarity over as you grow, as you get rid of these separate selves. It could of course be both. You are meant to bring first certain ideas and then ascend. I can certainly see that's the case for myself. I was meant to bring forth these spiritual teachings that I have been publishing on websites and books for 20 years. And then when that work is done, I'll be ready to move on. And I can assure you I will move on, because I've had enough of Earth. I've simply had enough of Earth. Not in a negative way, but there really isn't anything I want to do here. And I think many spiritual people feel the same way. The thing is, we can't move on from Earth until we have overcome all of these separate selves that causes us to have attachments to something on Earth. Because even if you have the attachment, as I talked about in my last video, I'm here to help remove war from the Earth, well, then you would have to say, well, I can't ascend until war is gone from the Earth. And that could be a while. So you have to be willing to look at that. You have to be willing to stand there, like I've used the example of the Buddha sitting under the tree, and the demons of Mara were attempting to get him to react. So if the Buddha had said, no, I can't leave until war is removed, well, he couldn't have gone into nirvana. And the same thing with us. We can't ascend if there's still something we want to change on Earth. So hopefully I will, at that point, be ready to look back, give one last long look back at Earth and say, nothing pulling on me. I'm moving.